My name is Fiona Young, and I was 34 the year I discovered which family was real. It began with a phone call at 8:14 on a Tuesday night. My 9-year-old Cora was lying in a hospital bed 90 minutes from home, and my 2 little boys were asleep in their room with no one to watch them. So I did something I had never done in my entire life. I called my own mother and asked her for help. What she said back, I'll get to. But her answer wasn't even the worst thing I heard that week. My ex-husband's wife had a worse one. And what I did a year later, after the part one can still barely say out loud, none of them saw coming. Some doors you spend years trying to open. Some you finally get to close. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where we tell quiet stories about ordinary people, impossible choices, and the moment everything shifts. If you have ever asked your own family for help and received nothing back, this one is for you. Stay with me because the part that matters most doesn't happen in that hospital. It happens at my front door a year later when the people who said no come knocking. Drop a comment below and be sure to subscribe. For most of my life, asking for help felt like admitting the whole thing might fall apart, so I never did. I raised 3 kids in a 2-bedroom rental, and I paid for it the only way I knew how, which was writing. Grant proposals, hospital newsletters, the careful kind of sentences that make strangers open their wallets for someone else. I drafted everything in pencil first. On yellow legal pads, I bought 12 to a pack from the dollar store. Ka used to steal them to draw horses in the margins. Theo, who was 6, thought the pads were boring. Wyatt, who was 4, liked the sound of the pages turning. We didn't have much, but we had a rhythm, and that rhythm held us. School drop-off at 8, work until midnight, lunches packed the night before so nobody was late. I told myself I could carry anything if I planned hard enough. I kept a budget for groceries, a budget for gas, a budget for the dentist 3 months ahead. The one thing I never budgeted for was needing another adult in the room. Mark had walked out 2 years earlier when Wyatt was still in diapers. After that, I just became more efficient. The way you do when there is no second pair of hands to catch what you drop. People at school called me strong. For a long time, I thought it was a compliment. I see now it was also their way of saying they expected nothing from themselves. There is a difference between carrying weight and carrying it alone. And I had spent 34 years refusing to understand it. That Tuesday night, the difference finally caught up with me. Cora was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia when she was 7. We did the long fight then, the one with spinal taps and steroid weeks where she screamed at me for cutting her toast wrong. Then she went into remission and gave us a year that felt almost normal. She turned 9 in March. In April, the blood work came back wrong again. The oncologist used the word relapse and then softened everything around it. But I had written enough medical copy to know that a relapse after first remission is the harder road, the one with fewer turns left. They wanted her admitted for an intensive block of chemotherapy. The hospital with the pediatric oncology unit was 90 minutes away, straight up Route 9, and Cora needed a parent at the bedside, which meant me. Here is the part nobody tells you. I am a freelancer. Freelancers don't get 12 weeks of job-protected leave that other parents can use because that law only applies to employees, and I employ myself. There was no paid time off. No sick day bank. Every hour I sat beside Cora's bed was an hour I wasn't earning. And I had 2 clients slowly drifting toward other writers who replied faster, so the math was harsh and simple. I had to be in 2 places 90 minutes apart, and I only had one body to do it. Theo and Wyatt couldn't stay alone. And with me at the hospital, my income had already been cut in half. Full-day care for 2 boys cost nearly $400 a week, more than I was making now that work had slowed. A good week used to cover rent, 3 kids, and a little left over. There hadn't been a good week since April. I sat in the hospital parking garage that first night and counted gas in dollars instead of gallons. Then I did the one thing I had sworn I would never do. I made a list of people I could ask. There was exactly one name at the top. My mother's name is Diane. She had me when she was 26 and has spent every year since reminding me what it cost her. She gave up nursing school. She told the family at every holiday it was because of the pregnancy, because of me. She kept a ledger in her mind of everything she sacrificed, and the balance was always against her children. I knew all of this, which is why my hands were shaking when I called her at 9 that first night. I kept it brief. Cora was back in the hospital. I needed help with the boys for a few weeks. Even just mornings. Even just sometimes. There was a pause long enough for me to hear my own heartbeat. Then she didn't say no. She did something worse. She started asking questions that felt like accusations. How long would this last? Whether I had thought any of this through when I decided to have 3 children I couldn't afford. Whether writing would ever become a real job, or if I planned to depend on everyone else forever. I stood in the garage stairwell feeling myself shrink. I said, "Mom, she has leukemia." I said, "I'm not asking for money. I'm asking for someone to be in the house while my babies sleep." And Diane took a breath I recognized from childhood, the one she used right before saying what she had been holding back. I held the railing and waited for it. I told myself I could take it. I had always been able to take it. I was wrong about that too. What she said was this: "You chose this life. Don't make it ours." I didn't respond right away because the sentence kept unfolding in my head, growing heavier the longer I held it. You chose this life, as if Cora's marrow had voted on it. As if the boys had submitted an application. My mother kept talking the way she does when silence makes her uncomfortable. Listing why it wasn't her responsibility. She and my father were retired now. They had routines, a garden club, a cruise deposit that couldn't be refunded. My father, Roy, was somewhere in the background of the call. I could hear the television and the specific quality of his silence, the kind a man uses when he has decided that saying nothing means staying clean. He didn't pick up another phone. He didn't call me later. All my life I had watched him shrink behind whatever my mother decided, and I told myself he was gentle. That night I realized gentle was just the word we used, so we didn't have to name it properly. I said, "Okay." I don't know why I said okay. Maybe because there was nothing left to negotiate anymore, and a person can only stand in a stairwell asking for help so long before the asking starts to cost more than the help would ever be worth. I hung up. I drove home at midnight 90 minutes down dark Route 9, and let myself into a silent house where my sons were asleep and safe only because I had paid the neighbor's teenager $40 I didn't actually have. I sat on the hallway floor. I didn't cry. I started writing a different list. We had a family group text. My mother had named it The Youngs years ago with a small blue heart, back when she still cared about the illusion that we were close. By that week, it had become the place where I watched my family consistently choose everything else. The next morning, I sent a message into it, careful and restrained, the kind you write when you already know the answer, but still feel obligated to ask. Cora is back in the hospital for a few weeks of treatment. If anyone can take Theo and Wyatt even one afternoon, it would help more than I can explain. I watched the small word appear under it. Delivered. A few hours later, it changed to read. My mother had read it. My father had read it. My aunt in Ohio had read it. Nobody typed the 3 dancing dots. Nobody replied at all. What they did instead that same afternoon was continue posting in other chats and on their pages, places I could still see, because modern life doesn't even grant you privacy in being ignored. My mother liked a cousin's vacation photos. She commented on someone's banana bread with 3 exclamation points and a recipe request. She was online. She was active. She was choosing, in real time, exactly where her attention went. And it wasn't toward the message about her granddaughter's cancer. I stopped waiting for a response. Read receipts, I learned that week, are their own kind of answer. They just don't have the honesty to say it out loud. I put my phone face down on a cafeteria table beside coffee I couldn't taste, and I told myself there was still one number I hadn't tried. The last name on my list was Mark. Cora's father. Theo's father. Wyatt's father too, in the technical way biology insists on even when nothing else does. He had moved an hour away after the divorce and married a woman named Belle the following spring. They had a new baby, a new house, a porch I had only ever seen in the background of photos. I didn't want to call him. I called anyway because Cora was still his daughter, and there are moments when pride simply doesn't get to vote. Belle answered. I heard a baby in the background, a kitchen, music playing somewhere. I identified myself even though she already knew. I told her Cora was in the hospital, that it was serious, and that I needed help with the younger two so I could stay with her. There was a small sound, almost a laugh but not quite. Then Belle said the sentence I would carry for an entire year. Like, casual, like she was reading it off a box of cereal. You're just a poor writer. Deal with it. The line shifted, muffled, like she'd covered the phone. Then Mark came on for exactly one sentence. Now's not a good time for us, he said. Not a good time for them. I stood in a hospital hallway under a flickering light, holding a phone that had just confirmed, twice in 2 days, from 2 different voices, that my children's emergency was an inconvenience to the people who were supposed to love them most. I hung up. I went back into Cora's room. She was asleep. I picked up a yellow legal pad and a pencil and started planning. So I built a life out of duct tape and sheer will, and for a while it held. Barely, but it held. The neighbor 2 doors down, Mrs. Linkfist, was 78, widowed, and lonely in the kind of way that makes generosity instinctive. She took the boys most mornings and refused the money I tried to leave on her counter. So I started slipping it inside her newspaper instead. The hospital social worker, a calm man named Dennis, arranged a room in the family housing near the unit, the kind of place meant for parents who can't afford hotels and can't bear to leave. I worked in the hallway outside Cora's room at 2 a.m., laptop on my knees, writing newsletters for a cardiology practice while a monitor beeped behind a closed door. Dennis gently asked if I had family who could help share the load. I told him they were busy. I didn't explain further. There was a version of this where I lied on every form, inflated my situation, left out the small freelance income still trickling in. I thought about it sitting there at 2 a.m. with my bank app open. But I've always had a problem with lying, even to systems that don't tell the truth first. So I told the truth on everything and accepted only what the truth allowed. It wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. I sold the second car. I canceled the dentist. I learned which gas station off Route 9 was 4 cents cheaper. I planned everything down to fractions of dollars because it mattered. And every night, before I allowed myself to sleep in a chair, I checked my phone one more time. The thread stayed silent. Eventually, I stopped being surprised. The oncology floor has its own clock. Outside, life runs on days and weekends. Inside, time is measured in lab draws, vitals, and the heavy quiet between 3 and 5 a.m. when the hallway empties and the building feels like it is breathing. That's when I wrote. One night, a nurse stopped at the edge of the light. She was about 50, glasses pushed into gray hair, name tag reading Angela. She looked at the legal pad on my knees, the pencil, the unpaid work I was pretending mattered. She didn't ask questions. She just said, "You should eat something. There's pudding in the family fridge. Nobody fights over the vanilla." That was it. No advice. No pity. No careful sympathy tilted in my direction. I had become allergic to that tilt, the way people aim compassion like it costs them nothing. Angela didn't do that. 20 minutes later, she returned with 2 vanilla puddings. She set one beside me without a word and ate the other standing up, watching the empty hallway like we were on the same shift. Inside the room, Cora was awake, still bossy, even sick, running a video call with her brothers. "Theo, hold the phone higher," she ordered. "Wyatt, that's not how you build it." Even hooked to monitors, she was still the one in charge. I watched her correct Wyatt's blocks and thought, that's a girl who still has plans. I didn't yet understand Angela would matter. I thought she was just a nurse with pudding. I was wrong, in the best possible way. That month, I learned how to be 2 mothers at once, neither of them complete. In the mornings, I was the one driving back down Route 9 to make pancakes and answer Theo's questions, because Theo had started asking every day in the steady way children do when they believe adults actually know. "When is Cora coming home? Is she coming home for my birthday? Can she still be my partner for the science fair?" I gave him answers broken into small enough pieces to swallow, and I hated myself a little more each time. Wyatt didn't ask questions. He just clung to me, wrapping himself around my leg every time I tried to leave for the hospital again. One morning he bit my forearm hard, then broke down sobbing like the world had ended. I sat with him on the kitchen floor until we were both late for everything. In the afternoons I became the other mother, the bedside one. The one who read the same horsebook chapter 4 times because Cora liked it and the steroids kept wiping her memory clean. I tried my mother one more time in the middle of that month. Not a call. I couldn't survive another call. Just a text, straight from the thread. "Mom, I'm drowning. Is there any way?" The typing dots appeared. My heart did something foolish and hopeful. Then the dots vanished. No reply came. And sitting later in a parking garage with the engine off, I realized I had stopped looking toward the front door when I came home. Stopped listening for a car in the driveway that might finally be them. You don't notice when hope leaves. You only notice later that the waiting has gone silent. That's its own kind of grief, and it arrives before the real one does. I want to pause here because I know some of you are in a hospital chair right now, or once were. If you've ever slept folded in half beside someone you love while the people who should have shown up stayed away, leave me just one word below. Just one. I read every single one and I'll understand. And if you want to see how this turns, subscribe and stay with me. Now back to it. That same week I sent my mother that message, the one she saw and ignored. I made the mistake of opening the family thread instead of closing the app. She had posted there anyway. Not to me. A photo. The garden club. A long table of women in pastel cardigans, tiny sandwiches, a banner that read Spring Luncheon. My mother in the center laughing, a pale drink in her hand. The caption said, "So blessed by my girls." 41 likes. I stared at it longer than I should have. At the bottom was a small gray timestamp, and something about it snagged in my mind and refused to let go, like a splinter you can't see but still feel. I didn't follow it that night. I was too exhausted, and Cora needed her 4 a.m. meds. Exhaustion always wins over splinters. But it stayed there, quietly lodged. A few days later, Cora spiked a fever in the night. The dangerous kind. The kind that empties a room of calm and fills it with urgency and gloves. Her temperature climbed, the monitor line turned jagged, and for 2 hours the word no one wanted to say sat in the room with us anyway. I needed someone, anyone, to be at the house. If this turned into the worst version of itself, I couldn't leave Cora alone, and I couldn't risk the boys waking up to a stranger. I called my mother at 8:14 that night. It rang out. I didn't text. By morning, Cora had stabilized, and I was left hollow with a relief that felt like grief wearing a different face. That morning, in the family lodging with cold coffee and the boys safe because Mrs. Linkfist had answered on the first ring, I finally followed the splinter. I opened the thread, found the garden club photo, checked the timestamp. 8:14 p.m. The exact minute I had been standing over my daughter's bed, calling my mother, listening to it ring and ring. And then, because grief makes you thorough, I found Belle's public post from the same night. A wine bar. 2 glasses mid-clink. The caption, "Date night with a small heart." Same hour. Same world. My daughter burning with fever in a hospital bed, and the 2 women who could have come were holding drinks for a camera. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just placed the phone down very carefully on the bed like it might break. And I made a decision I'd been circling for weeks. I stopped asking. Not out of pride. Out of math. You can't keep withdrawing from an account that has never once held anything for you. After that morning, something in me went quiet, but also sharp. I stopped spending my hope on people who weren't coming, and started spending everything I had on the one who was running out of time. What happened next wasn't what you'd expect. In its own strange way, those weeks were almost gentle. When you stop waiting for rescue, you stop watching the door. And when you stop watching the door, you finally see what's actually in the room. What was in the room was Cora. We painted her nails in bed, different colors on every finger because she couldn't choose, and she had strong opinions about everything. We made the boys laugh over video calls until Wyatt fell off the couch. We read the horse book again, and started another. One evening, Angela came off her shift still in scrubs and left something on the windowsill of our lodging room. A glass casserole dish with a blue lid, warm, a note held on with a rubber band. From the floor staff, it said. Though I would later learn there was no floor staff fund. It was just Angela, her kitchen, and her Sunday. We ate it at the small table. 3 of us on a screen, Cora and me with real forks. It was the first warm meal someone had made for me in longer than I could remember. I washed the dish that night intending to return it. It stayed by our door for weeks. I kept telling myself I'd give it back when things settled. For 3 weeks, I almost believed things would settle. I didn't know we were running out of weeks. I didn't know that dish would still be sitting there when everything ended. The treatment that was supposed to buy her time stopped working the way they hoped. I won't walk you through the medicine. If you've been there, you already know. If you haven't, you don't need the picture. What matters is who she was. She stayed bossy. She stayed funny. 2 days before the end, she made me promise, with a seriousness that pinned me in place, that I wouldn't let Wyatt eat her candy. Her secret stashed in the shoebox under her bed. Because Wyatt, she said, did not respect good candy and would ruin it. I promised. I would have promised her anything. She asked me clear, strange questions in those last days, the kind children ask when they've moved ahead of the adults. She asked if it would hurt. I told her the truth, that the doctors had medicine so it wouldn't. She nodded like she was approving a plan. Once, she caught me writing on the yellow legal pad in the chair and asked, "Mama, are you sad when you write about me?" I hadn't told her I was writing about her. I wasn't even sure I'd admitted it to myself. But she had seen me watching her over the top of the page. Kids always see everything. I said, sometimes. But mostly I'm glad, because it means I get to keep you on paper too. She thought about that. Then write the good parts, she said softly. The horse book parts, not the hospital parts. Okay, baby, I said. The good parts. She closed her eyes. I stayed there with the pencil still in my hand, unmoving, and I understood, without either of us saying it, that she knew. She was 9 years old. She knew, and she was still taking care of me gently, the same way she had taken care of her brothers from that bed. I let her. She died on a Sunday morning early, when the hallway was at its quietest and the whole building seemed to breathe slower. I had been awake all night in that chair, and somewhere around 5, she became peaceful in a way I recognized wasn't the right kind of peace. I climbed into the bed with her, careful around the lines, and held her the way I had held her on the first morning of her life, when she was 8 pounds of furious red, and I had no idea what I was doing. Angela was there. She stayed past her shift without making it into something important, the way she did everything. When the monitor's sound began to soften and stretch, she reached over and turned the volume down, so the last minutes belonged to us instead of the machine. I won't tell you the rest. That part is mine. Only this, there was a moment afterward when the room went completely still, and the morning light started to turn gray through the blinds. A young resident asked me gently if there was anyone they could call, anyone who should be here. And I almost laughed, because the honest answer was no. The people you call are the people who come. And that month, I had learned exactly who came, and who only let the phone ring. I shook my head. Angela rested a hand on my shoulder for just a second, then went to do the things that have to be done. I looked down at my hands that had spent 9 years learning every weight and shape of this child, and I found the only true sentence I had left in the wreckage of that morning. I gave it all to her. Everything I had, I gave it to her. Then I folded the yellow legal pad shut, and I went to find a phone, because I had 2 sons at home who still didn't know their sister was gone. The days after a child dies don't move like normal days. They pull. I remember pieces of it, telling Theo, and the way his face changed into something I never want to see again. I remember Wyatt not understanding at first, then understanding all at once 3 hours later in the bathtub, where 4-year-old grief apparently goes. I remember the casserole dish still sitting by the door. I remember the funeral, because that was when my family finally arrived. They came in dark clothes and louder grief than I had heard from them in years. My mother cried the hardest in the room. She held hands at the door, accepting condolences as though she had been at the bedside every hour instead of at a garden club luncheon at 8:14 on the worst night of my life. I heard her tell a cousin in that soft, sacred voice people use at funerals, "We did everything we could. Everything we could." I stood 10 feet away, holding my son's hands, and I didn't correct her, because you don't fight at your daughter's funeral. And because some part of me understood she needed that sentence just to stand upright in the room. Belle sent a wreath. Huge white lilies, the most expensive arrangement there, with a gold ribbon that read, "Beloved Cora." She and Mark didn't come. Only the wreath did. I had it moved to the back. My father stood against the wall the entire time, not speaking, his eyes wet, his hands hanging useless at his sides. For a second, our eyes met across the room, and he looked away first. Their presence at that funeral felt colder than their absence ever had. At least absence is honest. I'm going to be honest about the week after, because I promised you honesty and I won't break that. There was a night, maybe 4 or 5 days after the burial, when I sat at the kitchen table after the boys were asleep and I didn't want the morning to come. I won't stay there too long. People who have been in that dark already know the shape of it, and people who haven't don't need to. I'll just say this. The bottom of grief is a real place. I was there. The world had gone very small, very quiet, and very convincing in its silence. What pulled me back was a sound. The house was still in that 2 a.m. way houses get. And then I heard my son's breathing in the next room. Theo's heavier rhythm, Wyatt's quick, uneven one, out of sync the way they always were. I sat there listening. Two boys who had already lost their sister. Who had a father who said, "Not a good time." Who had grandparents who watched calls ring out. If they lost me too, they would have nothing left. That was the truth I couldn't ignore. I had spent a month learning the only reliable constant in their lives was me. So I decided to keep showing up. Not because I felt strong. Because they were breathing, and I was still theirs. 1 week after Cora died, there was a knock at the door. I almost didn't answer it. I assumed it was a neighbor with another casserole, because grief in our town travels in aluminum trays. But the knock came again. Patient. Not demanding. Something in me stood up. It was Angela. Off shift, in regular clothes I had never seen. Jeans and a cardigan that made her look like someone's aunt instead of the woman who had turned down a monitor so I could say goodbye. In her hands were two things. One, a casserole dish, glass with a blue lid, the same kind, the same shape as the one still sitting unwashed by my door. Because of course she had made more than one. Two, a notebook. Plain black cover, cheap drugstore kind, brand new, the price sticker still on the corner. She didn't come in. She stood on the step. "I know it's not my place," she said. I told her it was, probably the only place that still felt real. She held out the notebook. And then she said the thing that changed the direction of everything. "You kept writing at 3 in the morning for a reason," she said. "Even when you were too tired to see straight, you wrote. So write it down. Even the parts you can't say out loud. Especially those." I took it. I didn't promise anything. I couldn't make promises that week. But I stood there holding that cheap black notebook in both hands on my own front step, the same step where, a year later, very different people would come knocking, and something inside me that had been locked tight for a month shifted by a single degree. I didn't write that night. I wrote the next morning, before the boys woke up, in pencil on a yellow legal pad, because some habits survive grief. The first sentence was small. Ordinary. True. It was about toast. How she had screamed at me at 7 years old on steroids, because I cut it into squares when she had clearly, absolutely wanted triangles. I wrote it because it was real. Too small to perform. Too alive to fake. And once I had one true sentence, I could find another. So I wrote the horse book. I wrote the nail polish, every color on every finger. I wrote how she ran her brothers' entire lives from a hospital bed. And yes, I wrote the hospital parts too. The parts she told me to leave out because she was 9, and because she was wrong about what she could carry. And because the only way I survived them was by putting them on paper where they couldn't keep breaking me in real time. So I wrote them. I wrote about the phone ringing at 8:14. I wrote the garden club photo, the wine bar, the date stamped in gray at the bottom. I wrote, "You're just a poor writer. Deal with it," exactly as Belle had said it, because writing it down was the first time I could look at it without flinching. I became two people again, though not the same two I used to be. In the daytime, I was a mother making pancakes, packing science fair projects, learning how to be the only parent of 2 boys instead of 3 children. At night, I became the woman with the pencil. I didn't write to publish. I want to be very clear about that, because of how this story eventually turns. I wrote to breathe. The pages piled up on the kitchen table, yellow sheets and gray pencil smudges, and without asking permission, they began to form something with shape and weight. If you've ever lost someone and felt the words stuck behind your teeth, Angela told me something I'll pass to you now. Write one true sentence. Not for an audience. Not for a book. Not for approval. Just one sentence that is true. Even if it's about toast. That one thing saved me. And I don't say that lightly. If any of this is reaching you, Subscribe and stay with me, because what comes next is where everything changes. A few weeks into writing, Angela mentioned a bereavement group at the public library, Thursday nights, back room, bad fluorescent lights, surprisingly good coffee. I almost didn't go. I went because she offered to stay with the boys, and because someone who had turned down a monitor so I could say goodbye had earned my yes. The group was small, 8 people and a facilitator, and a box of tissues no one used, because grief at a certain depth doesn't leak the way people expect. They asked if anyone wanted to read. I had a page in my bag. I hadn't planned to share it, but my hand pulled it out anyway. I read them the toast, the squares, the triangles, the screaming. When I looked up, the room was still. A woman across the circle, older than me, who had lost a son, reached over and placed her hand on my wrist. She didn't say a word. That was the first time my truth landed in a room full of strangers and wasn't softened, corrected, or explained away. Nobody told me I had chosen my life. Nobody told me to deal with it. They just listened. And that listening was something I could stand on. Her name was Patricia. It turned out she had been an editor before she retired, the real kind. The kind who spent decades shaping other people's grief into something readable. Over bad library coffee, she asked if there was more than one page. I told her there was a kitchen table full of it. She asked if she could read it. I almost said no. Those pages were mine and Cora's and no one else's. But Patricia had lost a child, so I trusted her in the way you only trust someone who has already burned in the same fire. She read it over 2 weeks. Then she told me plainly, no softness, no performance, that it was a book, that it deserved to be one, and that she knew an editor at a small press who should see it. I want to be honest about what happened next, because the internet loves a version of this story where the right email changes your life overnight. That didn't happen. The first editor passed. So did the second. The third said the writing was strong, but the subject was difficult to sell, a sentence I've learned how to forgive without forgetting. It took nearly a year and a stack of polite rejections before a small press in the Midwest said yes. The advance was modest. I cried anyway. Not for the money. For the fact that someone with no reason to be kind had read the worst year of my life and decided it deserved to exist beyond me. We titled it from something Cora said near the end. Half asleep, she talked about horses running out of a burning barn, more beautiful afterward with soot still on them. From Ashes, she called it. She just didn't know she had named it. From Ashes came out on a Tuesday in spring, almost exactly a year after Cora died. For 2 weeks, it did what small press books usually do, almost nothing. Then a mother with a large online following, someone who had also lost a child, read it and wrote about it. And something broke open. It moved the way grief moves when it finally finds language for itself. Hand to hand, mother to mother, through group chats and quiet online spaces where women carry their real lives. It hit a bestseller list. Then another. Bookstores I had never seen reordered it. Letters started coming, hundreds of them. Women who had slept in hospital chairs while their families stayed home. Women told to deal with it. Women who thought they were the only ones carrying what couldn't be carried. They weren't. I wasn't. That was the point. And it was landing. Here is the part that matters. I didn't change a single name in the book except Cora's. I kept hers because she earned it. I wrote the phone ringing at 8:14. I wrote the garden club, the wine bar, the silence. And on page 204 in plain black ink, anyone could read the exact sentence Belle had said to me while my daughter was dying. You're just a poor writer. Deal with it. A national reviewer pulled that line for her headline. It spread everywhere. Belle had said it once in a kitchen, thinking it would disappear. Now it was being read aloud in book clubs across dozens of states. I never raised my voice. I never sent a single angry message. I just wrote down what was true and let strangers carry it for me. The family thread had been silent for over a year. The group my mother named the Youngs, with its little blue heart, had gone quiet the day we buried Cora and stayed that way. I had stopped checking it, so I noticed when it lit up again. The book had been out about a month when a reporter from a regional paper called my mother for comment. That's how she found out her granddaughter's death had become something strangers were reading. Suddenly, The thread had a pulse. My mother posted a photo of the book cover. "So proud of my daughter," she wrote, with a red heart. The same red heart she had once used on a banana bread recipe while I was begging her for help. So proud. As if pride could be mailed in late and still count as something real. Then Belle posted a public review. 5 stars. Always knew she had it in her. Such a brave, talented woman. Belle, the same woman who said the poor writer line, was now praising the book that contained her own words, apparently without irony, or without reading far enough to recognize them. I read it 3 times just to be sure it was real. And not once in that suddenly enthusiastic thread, not my mother's pride, not Belle's 5 stars, not a single comment, did anyone say Cora's name. They had found the spotlight, but they had not found the child. I should have known what would come next. A week later, it came knocking. By then we had moved into a different house. Nothing grand. Just a small place at the end of a quiet street, with a yard, 3 bedrooms, and a porch. And it was the porch where this part unfolded, because life always insists on symmetry, even when you don't want it to. It was a Saturday afternoon in early summer when the knock came. The boys were outside in the yard. And when I opened the door, they were all standing there. My mother in her best coat, my father just behind her with his hands in his pockets, and beside them Mark and Belle, people I hadn't seen in person since before the divorce, dressed like they had rehearsed the moment. My mother held flowers. Store-bought. The plastic still crackling. For a second, I just looked at them. This careful arrangement of people who had each, in their own way, told me no when no might have broken me completely. The last time someone had stood on my step offering something, it had been Angela with a notebook. This was the opposite of that. My mother spoke first, her eyes already shining in that controlled way she had perfected, the kind of tears that arrive on cue. "Fiona," she said, "we've all been doing a lot of thinking. We want to make things right. We're family. We're still family." Behind her, my father nodded at the porch boards. Belle shaped her face into something soft and practiced. Mark looked out at the boys in the yard, his boys, like someone checking whether an investment had held its value. And I stood in my own doorway in the home my own words had paid for and understood something very clearly. The people who had told me to deal with my life alone had returned the moment that life became worth attaching themselves to. I didn't invite them in. I stepped onto the porch and closed the door behind me so the boys couldn't hear. What followed was the strangest negotiation I have ever witnessed, and I used to write copy for a living. My mother led with the family story. Blood is blood. Cora would have wanted this. She used my dead daughter like punctuation at the end of her sentences, and I let her continue because people reveal themselves completely if you stay silent long enough. Then the angle shifted, as it always does. There was mention of the book. How it would be nice if the next one included happier family memories. Holidays. As if those had ever truly existed. Mark added carefully that since things were going so well for me now, surely we could all be reasonable about helping each other out. Family helping family. There it was. The word. Help. The same word I had once whispered into a stairwell at 9 p.m. in complete desperation, now returned to me dressed in comfort and timing. Except now there was money involved. So suddenly, help had become something families were supposed to do. Then Mark said the sentence that ended everything, though he didn't realize it. He said he had been thinking he should see Theo and Wyatt more regularly. That it wasn't right for a father to be cut off. At that, Belle went still. And something passed between them. I recognized it instantly. Now's not a good time for us. A year ago, that had been the sentence that erased me. And now us had shifted shape. A whole year of silence, and the moment it broke, he instinctively leaned toward his wife instead of his children. I didn't need proof of how the distance was built. I didn't need the explanation anymore. Whatever arrangement they had made, he had allowed himself to stay absent from his own living children, and only wanted back in now that their mother had become visible again. That realization, aimed at my sons more than me, was the only thing in the entire performance that actually moved me. Belle must have felt the air change, because she stepped forward with a careful smile. "Fiona, listen," she said gently. "We never meant that whole poor writer thing. That was just a hard day. We didn't mean it like that." I almost admired the precision of it. Because here is what I had learned. What that entire year had burned into me sentence by sentence. You don't need to match someone's volume to win. So I didn't raise mine. The louder they became, the quieter I got. Because I didn't need anything from them anymore. And a person who needs nothing from you is the one thing you can't control. I said, evenly, that I appreciated them coming. And the answer was no. No to the book discussions. No to rewriting the past. No to help between family. My mother's controlled grief collapsed quickly when it stopped working, and what came through instead was anger. After everything I sacrificed for you, she said sharply, voice rising, you're going to stand here and abandon your own mother? Abandon. The woman who had watched my messages go unanswered for a month was now using that word on my own porch. Belle joined in, speaking faster now. How unfair I was being, how I was punishing a child for adult problems, how I had exposed their private life in a book. They overlapped each other, louder and louder, building volume like it meant truth. And I just stood there, calm, my back to my own front door, watching them repeat on a Saturday afternoon exactly what they had already shown me a year earlier over a phone that kept ringing. Mark said nothing. Mark never says anything. And my father, the quiet man who had spent his life shrinking behind my mother's decisions, did something he had never done before. He looked up from the porch boards. He looked directly at me. His eyes were wet. And this time he didn't look away first. Fiona, he said. His voice broke slightly on my name. I should have. Then he stopped. The sentence just dissolved there in the air. I should have. And the rest of it was too heavy for a man who had spent 63 years practicing how to carry nothing. For one brief moment, I saw him clearly. A man who knew, who had always known, and who had chosen silence so many times that silence had become the only language he had left. Then my mother said his name, sharp, clipped. Roy. And he closed his mouth. He stepped back beside her. He chose her again. He would always choose her. That was the quietest, saddest truth standing there on the porch. And I let it be sad fully, because sadness doesn't change outcomes. When they finally exhausted themselves, when there was nothing left to shout, the porch settled into silence. And that silence belonged to me, because I was the only one standing in it without fear. I looked at my mother and said the sentence I had carried since the morning Cora died. The only clean truth I had been able to form that day. I gave it all to her, I said. I gave my daughter everything I had. I told them, hour by hour, dollar by dollar, piece by piece of myself, while the four of you decided it wasn't your responsibility. So there is nothing left here for any of you. I'm not holding it back out of anger. There is simply nothing left to give. I gave it all to her. Then I turned to my mother and gave her words back to her. The ones that had lived in my head for a year. The ones I had written down first thing. You told me I chose this life, I said. And not to make it yours. I nodded once. You were right about one thing. I did choose it. I chose these boys. I chose their sister. I chose to show up. My voice stayed steady. So here's the difference between us. I chose this life, and I will not make it yours. My mother opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Then I turned to Belle. She was still trying to arrange her expression, still searching for the version of a smile that could break me open like it used to. And for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her, standing on my porch, defending something she had built an entire comfortable year on. You want to know what I really think? I asked. She leaned in, hungry for it. I think you can read it like everyone else. It's in the book. Page 204. Then I opened my front door, stepped back inside, and closed it gently. No slam. A slam is for people who still need to be heard. I didn't. Through the glass, I heard my mother's voice rise again, sharp and breaking, then fade as my father, maybe for the first time, guided her down the steps. In the yard, Theo was pushing Wyatt on the swing tied to the one good tree. Neither of them had heard a word. And that was the only thing I cared about protecting. And I had. I went out the back door and pushed my sons. They didn't come back. For a while, there were messages on the thread, my mother cycling through wounded, then angry, then wounded again. Then even that stopped. I didn't block them. I didn't delete the group. I just turned the notifications off. There's a difference between slamming a door and quietly walking away from it. I finally learned how to tell. Life got smaller after that. And warmer. Which turned out to be the only direction I ever needed. The royalties from Ashes did something I had never known as an adult. They gave me space to breathe. Not luxury space. I opened accounts in the boys' names so no child of mine would ever be told there wasn't enough. I kept the small house with the good tree. I kept writing. Mornings now instead of 3 a.m., still in pencil, still on yellow legal pads, because some things don't need fixing once they finally start working. Angela became something I still don't have a perfect word for. She comes for a Sunday dinner most weeks. Theo calls her by her name. Wyatt calls her Grandma Angela, which she allows without correction, and the first time I heard it, I had to step out of the room so they wouldn't see my face change. One Sunday, a little over a year after that porch, I finally did what I had been meaning to do since the family lodging. I took the casserole dish, the glass one with the blue lid that had followed me through the worst months of my life, and I washed it until it shone. Then I filled it with my own cooking. And I returned it to Angela across a table in a kitchen with good light, 3 places set, and a 4th that we always leave anyway, for the girl who named the book. From the floor staff, I said, handing it back. Angela laughed. The real kind. Because we both knew there had never been any floor staff. There had only ever been her. And in the end, there had only ever been the people who showed up. That is who sits at my table now. The dish goes back and forth between us. Full in both directions. That's what family became. A warm dish that keeps coming back. I used to think family was blood. I buried that idea the same year I buried my daughter. Now I believe something simpler. Family is the people who show up when you have nothing left to give. And the ones who only arrive when it's finally easy, don't get to come in. That's my story. One daughter I would give anything to hold again. One nurse who knocked when I had nothing left. And 2 boys still here because, one quiet night, they were breathing in the next room. If someone in your life keeps showing up, tell them now, before you learn too late who won't. If this stayed with you, share it, comment, and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.